What up, YouTube? We're in the shop again. Quick and dirty video on e-bike diagnostic tools that you can make out of recycled components. Or you can buy a lot of this stuff if you'd like. But this video applies to, the DIY guy who is fixing a lot of e-bikes at home like this for their personal projects, or maybe even you work at a shop and you need tools to work faster. So this video is going to go into depth about creating the tools that you need to basically fix almost any e-bike, if not any e-bike that's 24, 36, or 48 volt. So every bike has a controller, and that controller does a few different things. It's going to send power and information to the motor. It's going to talk to a display unit at the top of the bike, like on the handlebars up there, and that's going to help communicate with the controller. And it's also going to have peripherals for connecting a bunch of stuff. So we're going to talk about how to create a controller that can do all the bikes. So if you haven't already, maybe you've been fixing bikes quite a while and you've collected a lot of spare components. I took this controller out of something that wasn't working and I repaired it, and now it works. So you could do that. All this material is all recycled components, some new, some recycled. I've got a bunch of adapters here, and then I've got connectors for days that I've been collecting from bike repairs. So if you are like me and you splice everything off and save it, I'll save you a lot of money. But let's talk about the controller and how it works. So this is a brushless controller, BLDC type, and this one's going to be a 24, 36, or 48 volt switching power supply controller. It will sense what kind of power is coming into it, and then it will switch appropriately. So you want to get one of these guys simply because you only need one, and then you can do all the voltages, right? So that's great. So that brings up the first point, which is how do you get power into the device from your bike battery? So every bike will have, like on this cheapo folding bike, some proprietary battery thing, whether it's integrated in the frame or whatever, and there's always connectors there. So I'll show you what I've done here. So I've mounted this controller onto this box here, which is just an empty box that used to house maybe a battery or something. I don't know. You can recycle these from all kinds of stuff. So I've taken this box, I've cut some holes in it and mounted my controller on it. And what I've done for power is routed it internally inside the box here. You can see controller power is heading into the box, and then inside I have a junction that gives me multiple connections. I can always open it and add more. I'm gonna leave room to expand. But here I have the very common spade or blade connector. This one's useful for if you want to make different connectors for different types of applications. You can have a bunch of adapters, right? And then I've got the most common XT60 connector, which is great for almost all connections. Really, this is the one that's almost most bikes come with that, even the fake Chinese bikes. Like for example, on this Fusion battery that I modified from a Sondor's bike, I've added an XT60 there. So this guy will plug right in there, right? So yes, that's a good adapter. And then there is also the very, very common Chinese bullet connectors, which I really don't like, but these bullet connectors are very common. So for testing purposes, it's good to have these things. For use, they have a lot of impedance and they get really hot and melt and stuff. These cause a lot of issues on a lot of e-bikes, but they're very common. So this can get you set up right away if you need to test a bike where the battery uses this style connector. So you've got power into your controller. Next thing is sending that power to your motor. So every bike controller will have 3 phase wires, which are these blue, green, and yellow phase wires here. So what I've done is I've taken the controller phases and I've sent them over to this junction, which has these lugs that I can loosen and add as many different adapters for phases as I'd like. Right now I have the very common bullet connector for Chinese e-bikes, which is the most common. And I almost forgot, this is also a very common eyelet style connector, which has these little pigtails you can just bolt in there, good to go. That is not always the case that you're going to encounter this, so I have solutions for the rest. I've also taken the hall sensors for the motor, which is this 6-pin connection, which is typically also on the bottom half. You're going to see it's yellow, green, blue. On the top it's going to be power, black, red, and white for speed signal. So this is the most common Chinese connector. Comes on a lot of cheapo stuff. So you've got your 3-phase wires and your 6-pin hall sensors. So we need to distribute that for all of the most common bikes. And so right off the bat, by creating this junction, I've got the bullet and the 6-pin plastic connector, and that's the most common, right? But what if you have a waterproof connector? So that's where this comes in. Onto this 6-pin plug, I've also attached a junction wire here that brings my hall sensors into the box. So now I've got hall sensors in the box as well, including phase wires in the box. I can show you a picture of what it looks like in here so you can see how I junctioned it all up, but you can get creative and do that how you want. And coming out of the controller is a real long waterproof Bafang 750 watt connector, and this one's great because it's extra long and I can test almost any bike with it. So how does it work? Well, if your motor already has this 3-pin Bafang connector like this one with the hall sensors on the outside, well, you're good to go. Plug that right in the motor and you're good to go. But let's say you have a 500 watt Bafang connector. So then what you need is to make one of these guys. And I've made this out of recycled materials as well, from a cable from a Bafang 750 watt motor where it fell over and it ripped. So for example, let's say your bike falls over and the axle hits the ground and it rips. Sometimes you've got to cut that and do a new splice of the cable. So a lot of the times I end up with spare these things, right? So that's where this came from. And so this guy is the male side, the motor side of the Bafang 750 watt connector, and then on this side I've spliced in the Bafang 500 watt female connector. What that lets me do is I can just take this plug here and plug this bad boy in there, and then I have now accessibility for the 9-pin, which will let me connect directly to this 9-pin, the most common, and that's how I can adapt to that connector. So those are the 3 most common. You've got bullet phase, cheap plastic 6-pin hall sensor. You've got Bafang 500. You've got Bafang 750. But sometimes there's another one you need. This bad boy right here. So this one goes from the cheap Chinese SMD plug right there, and this one will send you over to this guy, which is also a 6-pin connector, just a slimmer style one, also very common. You gotta be careful when you make this. I have it routed to the most common pins, but it's not always the case that that is the most common pin. So a lot of the times you'll find that it's not even the right orientation, it's the wrong pin out. So the colors, I find that the colors almost always do match, but you know, that you've got to check on your use case scenario. But this adapter works almost 99% of the time, and so sometimes you'll get this display adapter. So that one's nifty to have made. And then of course there are all the other motors. So for example, here I've got this weird connection, which is like a fake Chinese Bafang connector, 750 watt. And then there's more and more and more. Super 73, Juiced Hyper Scorpion. It goes on and on and on and on. So if you keep saving these things, you can make as many adapters as you'd like, and you can basically test any motor. So that's what this collection of stuff is for. So yes, you want XT60 adapters for power. You want adapters for charging, like barrel to XLR. You want adapters for everything. So just start collecting ends and start soldering them into place. Get yourself some of these and make some of these adapters. So that brings us onto the next section of adapters, which is peripherals for the controller, which is how do you actually control it, right? Human interface devices. So most controllers will have a display connector. For this one, it was really jacked up, so I've totally created a whole new connector here. And I want to show you guys how I use it for testing. So this guy here is the most common 9-pin to whatever on the other end wiring harness connector. So most bikes will have this guy here that have waterproof connections. For example, this bike here has a display, has controls, has brake kills, it has a throttle, and all of it comes into this wiring harness here, and all of it comes down, and it ends up coming out of the bike here, and you can see this is the male side 9-pin connector, and this is a 9-pin which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 connectors, right? So that'll give you throttle, that'll give you all your connectors. So you can use that if you want to test the existing setup on a bike. So in the case of this bike, if I wanted to test it, I would just take that wiring harness, plug that bad boy in right here, and then I'll know if my display is good, if all those peripherals are good, right? But let's say you don't want to do all that and you just want to test the motor, right? So you got your motor all wired up and you just want to test the motor. For that, I've bypassed a little section here, which you can do yourself by just soldering all the pins in, and I've added the most common throttle 3-pin connector here. The reason for that is so that I can take a throttle and plug that bad boy in right there, and I don't need anything else except for this guy, which is a display 5-pin bypass adapter. And I got this adapter from my brother who used to work at Sondors before they went out of business. This basically will jump 2 pins, the top 2 pins on there, which I can add a diagram in the video description if you want to see how to make one of these. But this one already comes pre-made. And basically, you'll plug this into where the display harness goes, and that'll bypass it, and then you can just use the throttle to test your motor. Won't give you speed or any other information. But if you do want to have that information, then you need a display. And that brings us onto this bad boy. So this guy acts like a wiring harness, right? It gives me my 9-pin connector there. But also it acts like a display interface. And I've wired inside a breadboard, and I put in all these pins. So a breadboard, kind of like let's see, kind of like one of these guys, or even one of these solid types. If you get a breadboard like this, you can then wire in as many pins as you'd like. I've only done the 5, so I don't have any other features here except for display, because that's all I really need for testing. So if I want to test different displays, Juiced Hyper Scorpion, Rad Power bikes, common 5-pin waterproof connectors, cheap Chinese clippy things, right? I've got them all, male, female, and I've got the most common types. There's going to be situations where the pins are not going to match, in which case you can then, using all these bad boys that I've collected here, you can just make whatever adapter you need. You can take this and you can pin it out whatever configuration you need for whatever purpose. In the case of this, I find that I mostly don't ever really need to do that. It's always good to go. So how would I wire it? Simple. I take this little adapter, I plug it in here, and I plug this box into my controller, and I bypass the display, and now I can use the throttle there. Or even better, get yourself one of these bad boys. This guy is a universal display that does 24, 36, or 48 volt. And this one's great. I usually just plug this in right to the box and plug the box into my controller, and that'll let me test basically any motor, and it will give me speed, it'll give me battery, it'll give me all the information I need. So you could do that. You could test existing harnesses. There is one other type of harness that's very common, which is this bigger 9-pin. This one's common for mid-drive motors like Fang, BBS HD, BBS SD, Tongsheng, like this bike here would use this type of connector. So mid-drive bikes, you're gonna have to make a mid-drive bike adapter like this guy, which I just went and soldered into one of these pins, which then will let me plug in there, and now I can connect whatever harness I'd like. So once you've got all your favorite connectors for the bikes that you work on hooked up into this box, which I repurposed from an old charger body. You can see it used to be a charger body that went bad. And all of these connectors are recycled from bikes that went bad, stuff that I chopped up. You can buy them again. It'll be really, really expensive though. So if you've been collecting them, that'd be ideal. Get yourself a universal display, connect that bad boy up, and then you can use your throttle here, or you can connect a wiring harness. And so it's wise to also have a collection of wiring harnesses. So here I've got a collection of displays in there, and I've got a collection of wiring harnesses of various types. And it's nice to have in case you want to do something particular. But for the most part, it's not necessary. I never really have to go beyond these two adapters to really do anything, and it works great. So let's wire it all up. We'll go ahead and plug the display into the box, plug the throttle into the controller, plug the motor into the bike, and I'll use this guy as a test, which had a bad controller. I've already discovered the issue by using this method. And so I'll plug it up and see and show you guys how to do a quick diagnostic. Alright, so we got the bike in the stand, and in this case I just want to test the motor to see if it works, right? So I've got a 500 watt 9-pin connector with the adapter I've made here that goes to my Bafang 750, and make sure that that's nicely and firmly connected. And that's going to my controller here. Then I've got the controller connected to a throttle, which I keep handy right here. Universal throttle, 3-pin. And then I've got the controller connected to this unit, which is my display harness adapter. And then I've got my display connected right to that bad boy. So I'll just go ahead and connect power, and I'll turn it on and show you how it works. Alright, so we've got power going to the XT60. So now I'm just going to power on the battery. And if we go over to our display here, we can power that bad boy on. See, it's come on. Now we're going to bring up the assist level, and we're going to hit throttle and see if it goes. We'll leave that guy there. Let's see. Cool. And we're getting speed. We're getting battery level. We're getting assist level. We're getting all our functions. Right now, sense 48 volt, working just fine. And that is how we test the motor. So let's say the motor does work, I'll leave it plugged in, but I don't want to use this display or junction box. I want to test that guy there. So what I'll do next is I'll plug into that wiring harness and see if I can get all that to work. That way I know if all that stuff works. Alright, so I took the wiring harness from the bike, plugged that into my controller, and that one's got all the pins routed, so I don't need to do anything else over here. Controller's plugged into the motor, and all of these connections are plugged in again. So let's power this on. I always turn the battery off before I do this. I'll turn that bad boy on. Let's see if it boots up and if all this guy's functions are good to go. So looks like he's good. I don't see any errors. I'll bring up the speed. I'll give it some throttle. Whoo! We do have an error 30. So something's not right on the display as well. I know my motor hall sensor connections are good. I know the controller's good. So there's either a problem with the wiring harness or this display unit is not compatible with this particular controller. Whatever the case may be, it would be best if we ordered a new controller kit with a display and throttle, just because you can see this one's gonna have issues. I know now if I order a new controller, just the controller for this bike, then I'm gonna get an error and that it'll go, but it's not what we want. You know, we want full functionality. So I'll go ahead and order a kit for this guy: controller, display, throttle, and maybe I'll try to recycle his brakes. If not, I'll just replace them. Either way, you can see this is a quick and dirty way of how to do diagnostics on almost any e-bike. Of course, there's the matter of big bikes like these Onyxes, 60 volt, 72 volt, Stealth Bombers, stuff like that. Not the case here. You need a whole different set of tools for these guys. And then most high-end mid-drive bikes, Tongsheng, Bafang, Yamaha, Shimano, all of those brands are gonna have proprietary stuff going on. You're gonna need special tools. So this video is not about that. I have some tools for that. Most of it is specialized and has to come directly from factory. There are some stuff you can do on the Tongsheng, some stuff you can do on the Bafang, but for the most part, everything else is proprietary there because it's just higher quality components. So when it comes to cheap Chinese bikes, this is where it's at. This will do almost everything. Rad power, all these generic folders, anything with a 250, 350, 500, 750, 1000 watt motor, anything with any of these connectors. This switching power supply controller will do it all. So that's just an example of how to get your shop in order as far as adapters go. Or if you're just an at-home hobbyist and you want to fix your bikes and you've got more than one bike and you want to test them all, this is another sure way to do that. But anyways, peace out, y'all.